Chapter 401, Searching for a Way Out Professional Gamer? This question caused Eternal Dominion to toss a withering look at Gufei. Given how popular MMOs were nowadays, the number of professional gamers far outstripped that of martial practitioners. So how was it not possible for him to come into contact with them? This question that Gufei had posed was as good as an insult to his intelligence, so he did not answer him, merely continuing to stare at Gufei like he was an idiot for even asking the question. When Gufei saw that Eternal Dominion glaring at him as if he had found a reason for revenge, he knew he had asked a foolish question, yet he laughed. I think you can become a professional gamer. It's a pretty reliable way for you to properly utilize your kung fu. What? Are you encouraging me to be a crook? There were many different types of professional gamers out there. Most would run themselves haggard, as busy as a bee, before selling the equipment to players who were filling the merchant role. These were all jobs that any average gamer could do, but anything that would require kung fu expertise would mean it required a show of force, and currently, the only job that someone like Eternal Dominion could fill into was only larceny. Eternal Dominion might not be up to Gufei's standard when it came to kung fu, but he was not a noob like Gufei when it came to gaming. Of course not, Gufei hurriedly corrected himself. If he did not explain himself, Eternal Dominion would most surely despise his lack of character for even suggesting it. Look, Gufei patiently began to talk him through his thought process. The gaming industry is huge. There are plenty of ways to earn a living in here. Take those larcenists for example. No one takes kindly to their actions, or even existence. So thinking in reverse, robbing these larcenists would not only get rid of this evil plaguing the game, there might even be rewards to be gained from taking them out. Fuck. Eternal Dominion had thought Gufei had came up with some ingenious business plan and was patiently listening to his explanation. He instantly expressed his disdain once Gufei finished. Larcenists like them essentially have the entire gaming community as their potential target, a huge pool for them to pick and choose from. Conversely, my client pool would be limited. How am I gonna find so many cases of robbery to act on? Of course there's sure to be some difficulty to this. How else could you earn anything from it if it was not so? Gufei criticized him back. So why aren't you doing it? Eternal Dominion retorted. Gufei thought for a bit, but he had no choice but to hurt Eternal Dominion once more with his reply. Bro, I'm not short on cash here. Eternal Dominion was in tears. He was right. Gufei's Gu family was hardly in the need of funds, and considering Gufei was the only one in his generation that was actually still practicing martial arts, he essentially had the entire family doting on him. Why would he need money of any sort? Bro, there's no way earning a living will be easy. Gufei counseled Eternal Dominion. I'll ask around and consider it, Eternal Dominion said. Gufei could tell from the tone Eternal Dominion had just used that he was not truly interested, so he tossed out yet another thought. What's more, those players that have been robbed will surely be upset about it. They might be willing to fork out money just to hire you to take care of those larcenists, right? Eternal Dominion thought that was not a bad idea when he heard it, yet the twinkle in his eyes quickly dimmed. That's rubbish. Of course those guys would love to take revenge, but the problem is that those sort of robbers will not usually reveal themselves so casually. Why would they not be aware that a host of their victims are looking to get even with them? See? That's an entire market right there. Most people would not be able to find them, so if you are able to apprehend them, you would essentially monopolize the scene yourself, bro. Gufei said. Eternal Dominion was exasperated. If the others could not even locate them, how would I be able to? I'm just yet another gamer in this aspect, as well. Buddy, you are one of the 5 unyielding experts. Use that, Gufei told him. Eternal Dominion began to think further upon this. By this time, he finally felt somewhat moved to act on Gufei's suggestion. Come, let me introduce you to some people, Gufei said. What people? Powerful people. They are all powerful entities, comparable to me and your dad in the martial community, Gufei said. Eternal Dominion was in tears once more. Gufei had actually placed himself and his own father next to one another. But Eternal Dominion also understood why Gufei hesitated just now. Gufei had originally wanted to me and you, But that was no longer a viable comparison. This was entirely because Eternal Dominion's name in the martial community was still barely known. The only one from Gu family that had made a name for himself was his father, so Gu Fei had no choice but to adapt what he wanted to say. Even though that was hardly courteous or humble, there was not any elders around them at the moment. There was no need to nitpick over such semantics since everybody here was of the same generation. Eternal Dominion wallowed in his sadness for a bit and did not say a thing about it. He followed Gu Fei as he asked, "Powerful people? What powerful people?" Obviously, the powerful people Gu Fei was talking about were those men in Young Master's elite. Even though Gu Fei was most likely better than any of them in terms of PvP, they were the real deal when it came to matters pertaining to the game, be it knowledge or the network they had. This was also the first time Gu Fei had attempted to initiate a meeting like this. Those experts gave him face. Meeting at the tavern as discussed. Everybody arrived separately, while Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion waited for them to trickle in. Every one of them widened their eyes when they entered. All of them recognized Eternal Dominion, and knew that the two men even had a PvP match right in the streets yesterday. They were rather amused to find the two men now sitting together like this. Gu Fei introduced Sword Demon, Young Master Han, Further Assist, and War Without Wounds one by one to Eternal Dominion. After hearing him reply, "I've heard so much about you," to each of them, Gu Fei finally could not stand it as he asked, "Have you really heard so much about them?" Gu Fei felt Eternal Dominion should be birds of the same feather, so there was no way he could have heard plenty about these MMOs experts. Eternal Dominion immediately tossed him a disdainful look. "I've never met them before, but having played this game for so long, how would I not be aware of these names?" Everybody around the table felt a pleasing sensation wash over them when they heard that. Though these two were both martial practitioners, they felt that Eternal Dominion was more likable than Gu Fei, and they instantly warmed up to him as they disregarded Gu Fei and abandoned him to his corner. Gu Fei was not exactly bothered by Royal God Call's absence, but seeing everyone but him here, he asked, "Where's Royal?" The four-men exchanged glances and answered in unison, "Did none of you travel with him?" The four men were silent in that moment. Young Master Han calmly raised his glass and took a gulp. "Then he's surely lost out there." Royal God Call had indeed lost his way. He was not alone to begin with, but he had suddenly spotted drifting on the street, yet the man did not seem to have seen him. That was an opportunity that Royal God Call had long been waiting for. He immediately went off on his own, trailing after drifting in hopes of finding a chance to finish his rival off. Even though they had all worked together for the mission previously, Royal God Call had never once regarded drifting as a friend. He still considered the mage to be someone he hated the most. Naturally, the solution for someone he hated most was to kill him off. It was a MMO after all, there were not that many laws or reasoning to follow. Furthermore, Royal God Call had always been a very conceited expert. But drifting was clearly making his way through the market, moving through the crowd of players such that Royal God Call had not found the opportunity to strike for the longest time. Trailing drifting all the way through such a crowd only ended up with him losing the trail and getting himself lost instead. Thankfully, Royal God Call was still within the city, so there were plenty of people he could ask if he was unsure. It was also at this moment that he received a message from Gu Fei, and he slowly headed in the direction of the tavern, inquiring with passers-by as he searched for his destination. It was very easy to ask for directions in an MMO. With how huge the virtual space in Parallel World was, players would often take care to note down the coordinates of several locales they often visited, so most of the players that Royal God Call approached were able to provide him with the right coordinates and direction. But he was a geographically inept person in the end, so such a precise and effective method of using the coordinates provided caused him much pain. What he had hoped for were instructions like cross this street, take a left and pass the next 3 streets, take a right turn and walk straight ahead before taking a final left sort of directions when he was approached other players. There were few players who would give such clearly defined directions in MMOs, so Royal God Call had a really tough time as he asked for directions and attempted to make his way over. After meeting the same player 3 times, asking for the same directions, that player was finally moved by the pitiful Royal God Call tightly clutching onto his booklet, putting his business on hold as he personally brought Royal Godcall to the tavern. Royal Godcall was very touched by this gesture, but he continued to act nonchalant about it. "Thanks a lot, man," Royal Godcall said. "The name's Royal Godcall. Just say my name if you ever meet any problem in the future." Unfortunately, this player helping him was an older gentleman himself. He had not spent much time playing MMOs, so he had never heard of this legendary name before. Moreover, Royal Godcall appeared to be no more than a bratty child in his eyes, so he merely smiled placidly as he dismissively said, "Sure. Don't wander around the city by yourself next time." This older gentleman parted ways with that final piece of advice. Royal Godcall instantly found his fellow mercenaries seated in the tavern as he made his way over to take a seat with them, acting all dignified. It had been almost 40 minutes since the next to last person, War Without Wounds, had arrived. The eyes of the lightweight sword demon was already glazed by this time. Gouffet did not even waste time giving Royal Godcall a proper introduction, slapping the table soundly as he declared, "Everybody's here. Let's talk business proper. Let me catch my breath first." Royal Godcall had been walking in the street for such a long time. While he was not physically tired, the mental exhaustion he experienced was substantial. Gouffet did his best to control himself, waiting for Royal Godcall to take 2 long draws of his liquor before finally asking, "Shall we begin?" Royal Godcall's keen eyes already saw that Gouffet's hand had already plunged down his dimensional pocket, so he quickly nodded repeatedly. "Eternal Bro here is preparing to become a professional gamer," Gouffet started. Hey, don't just make decisions for me willy-nilly," Eternal Dominion hurriedly interrupted. "Wasn't he just saying he was going to introduce me to some experts? How did things progress so quickly, anyhow? I haven't even made the decision to do this myself yet." Gouffet swept a glance to him, ignoring what he said. The others had already began to speak up. "Professional gamer? What business would that be? Larceny?" Sure enough, the first thought everybody had given the skills Eternal Dominion had demonstrated was how much of a waste it would be if he was not doing larceny. "Of course not. He's going to rob the larcenists," Gouffet said. "There's not much money to be made in that." These MMO experts came to the same conclusion Eternal Dominion had instantly. Players who excel in larceny depend mostly on traps and surprise attacks. The equipment they use is often very average, so there's no telling if there's anything to be made there. But they must surely be hated by the masses, right? Perhaps there are people out there willing to put a bounty on them? Gouffet pressed. Brother Assist immediately smiled, and it was a very confident smile at that. "If that's the case, then you would require plenty of information with utmost accuracy." Thus, Gouffet once more introduced Brother Assist in greater detail. "This is the king of information, Brother Assist. His well of information runs deep." Chapter 402, Hiring a Killer. Brother Assist was still smiling, except that confident smile of his had suddenly become quite avaricious. "It is indeed possible." Brother Assist began to expand upon the idea. "I've already begun to hear people posting for information about hiring men for revenge in the forums of many cities out there. Word on the street is that some mercenary groups have even begun to accept these sort of requests. Right now, the most difficult aspect to nailing these targets down is entirely the lack of information. It's not easy to find out where these people are hiding." "What? There's already people out there already doing this sort of thing?" Eternal Dominion had originally thought he would have cornered the market exclusively. He had not expected there would be others who had already attempted the same and momentarily felt discouraged. "Competition begets development." "Brother Assist, continue," Gouffet quipped. "Actually, it would be too limiting for you to merely focus on the larcenists. After all, you're really just helping your potential clients park their targets, right? There's already plenty of such requests right now. I dare say there must be plenty of missions up in the Hall of Mercenaries here in Lori City alone. However, the targets for these are usually experts and would often result in unending conflicts, so plenty of mercenary groups are unwilling to pick them up. However, given the strength that Eternal War possess, there's no way you guys have not came across such missions, right?" Brother Assist inquired. Eternal Dominion coughed once before answering sheepishly, "Of course we have. The rewards for these sort of missions are usually pretty high. If you keep doing them consistently, I think you'll definitely be able to reach the income a professional player makes. Eternal Dominion was quiet for a while before coming clean. It would be quite difficult for us to do these sort of missions here in Lori City. Why's that? Brother Assist was perplexed. Because the target for most of these missions is me. PFFT. Even the ever-calm young Master Han struggled to stifle his laugh, but he covered his mouth with a casual wipe of his hand. Please, continue. In that case, Brother Assist felt awkward as well. Had he considered the other side of things, Eternal Dominion's mercenary group had demonstrated a level of strength in Lori City that even the guilds were unable to keep up with. Even if he had not targeted anyone maliciously, plenty of people would be tempted to hire someone to assassinate him just out of jealousy alone. Then head to a different city, then. War without wounds was still far more direct when it came to his thinking. Actually, the main problem with such conflict between players is how difficult it is to prove who's in the right or wrong. It's not really easy to lend a hand like that. Eternal Dominion said. That's right, that's why I say the targets must be a bunch of evil larcenists. Gufei stated. The experts were originally surprised by the statement Eternal Dominion had made, but after Gufei's words, these men immediately realized that these two are truly the same sort, equating both morality and value equally. They might be very strong in parallel world, but they would never use that strength to prey on the weak. It seemed like it was a moral code that they would never turn their backs on. Gufei had never maliciously targeted others for PvP in the game. There were very few players that had died from Park when Eternal Dominion and his Eternal War mercenary group rolled up, too. This was one particular aspect that showed him to be kinder than Gufei, as Gufei would still act like a player did and not show a hint of mercy when the opportunity presented itself. He happily accumulated Park value in huge amounts, creating much talk about his crazy ways. Well, in that case, Eternal Dominion was clearly uninterested in Brother Assist's suggestion, and Brother Assist was naturally not going to bother convincing Eternal Dominion to change the way he thought, either. All he could do was follow along with the fighter's wishes. Well, it's sure to be a lot more difficult if you're only targeting the organizations that commit larceny and such. I'm not really confident I have that much information on these matters, myself. Seeing that the group of experts that he had gathered were not contributing anything positive to the formulation of this business idea of his, but were instead pointing out even more potential roadblocks in their way, and causing Eternal Dominion to hesitate and even shrink back from committing, he quickly knocked on the table. Now is not the time to plan that far ahead. I called you guys over because I know you guys have plenty of friends. Is there perhaps any potential business that you guys might have at hand to get Eternal Dominion started? All of them showed a rather despondent expression. Everyone present here were considered to be legendary MMO gamers. If they had any issue that they themselves could not handle, was there even a need to spend coin to hire others? Would that not just ruin the names they had made for themselves if word got out? Just as they were thinking Gufei was being a little too outrageous, it was young Master Han who suddenly said, "Ah, there is something." The others were stunned, but quickly realized what he was thinking about. "Oh, do tell." Gufei said, just as it came to him. "Wait a minute. You're not gonna hire him to kill me, are you?" Gufei felt that it was entirely possible for him to come up with such a vile idea. Young Master Han merely shot him a scathing look as he turned to Eternal Dominion. The warrior Southern Lone Blade is someone who dabbles in larceny, and he has his eyes set on us. Why don't you take care of him for us? No problem. Eternal Dominion immediately agreed. Truly a show of indomitability. All the experts marveled silently in their hearts. Even if Southern Lone Blade had lost a level, he was definitely not someone they would dare to belittle. After all, what good was a difference of just a level or two in MMOs? Parallel World had made leveling an arduous process precisely as a means to reduce this gap between the players. Southern Lone Blade might have dropped a whole level, but that did not change the fact that he was still a top-notch expert. On the other hand, Eternal Dominion did not even spare a moment's hesitation when he heard Southern Lone Blade's name come up, agreeing as readily as if he had just received a request to stomp on that ant outside your front door. This aura of power that he displayed was indeed far from ordinary. Southern Lone Blade. Gufei muttered. As the incident had only happened 2 days ago, He still had quite the impression of that warrior bearing a sword and shield in his hands. As for the price, how much are you intending to charge, Brother Eternal? Young Master Han asked. That, I'm not too sure about that. You guys are all MMO experts, do you mind helping me come up with something suitable? The tone Eternal Dominion used was sincere, which made things somewhat uncomfortable for these experts present. They were all more than happy to call themselves as peak experts in front of anyone, but truly felt it would be inappropriate and even lacking to do the same in front of people like Gufei and his sort. No one else had a better understanding just how frightening it was going up against people like Gufei and his fellow martial practitioners. Well, young Master Han turned to look at the others. After all, this matter pertained to everyone present, so this move expressed the fact that he would not be the only person paying the bill. Ahem. Honestly, we should be more than able to deal with this matter by ourselves. War Without Wounds began. Even though he was not actually saying they could really deal with it themselves, he nevertheless expressed this idea to use it as a bargaining chip for the price negotiations. What? So you guys don't need my help? The sincerity of Eternal Dominion's voice remained. War Without Wounds simply had no idea how to carry on when he heard the man say things so plainly. Don't be so hasty, Gufei hurriedly butted in. He's just all talk anyway. This matter is yours to earn for sure. Gufei turned his gaze to young Master Han as he said this. Gufei was nationally well aware that when it came to this gang of experts here, they would always seek to resolve a problem at hand by themselves before bothering others. There was only two reasons that this potential opportunity would be mentioned in front of Eternal Dominion. It was either their attempt at giving Gufei face, or there must be some other reasoning behind the matter. Since young Master Han was the one who raised this suggestion, Gufei was inclined towards the latter. Taking into consideration the man's personality, Gufei was rather certain that he might be looking to stir up trouble for Southern Lone Blade. In any case, he was certain that Southern Lone Blade had some tumultuous days ahead of him. Young Master Han chuckled, I'm not the only one who would be affected by this. Everyone, chip in. Everyone was now in tears. Although the matter truly affected each one of them, it was solely young Master Han's idea to hire Eternal Dominion. They had all essentially been dragged into paying. But now that the discussion had already come to a head, this was no longer the time to refuse chipping in. This was an embarrassment that no one would be willing to bear, so these people looked at one another, probably already discussing the matter of price. It is really hard to put a finger on how much it should cost when it comes to the price for this sort of mission. That's right. The market rate has yet to settle for this, so there's really no such thing as market rate to speak of. That's right. So how much should it be? Their discussion was done entirely over the mercenary channel, so Gufei could clearly see it happen in real time. They were all coming up with excuses and evidently against having to pay the bill. From Gufei's perspective, he did not think the amount here was key. It was more important to first allow Eternal Dominion to feel that this was a viable venture to go into. Taking a step back, Gufei felt it was better to become a hitman that targeted more than these larcenists with no questions asked than it was to violate the rule that the kung fu of old that had been passed down for generations refrained from imparting martial skills to people who were unable to discern between good and evil. After all, certain priorities outweighed certain others. Sometimes, it was better to choose the lesser of two evils. If all they did was get bogged down by strict rules and regulations, how would anyone be able to eke out a living? Thus, Gufei once more decided for Eternal Dominion. We'll leave the matter of price for later. Let's just complete this mission first. Come, let's take down Southern Lone Blade. Gufei said the first sentence to the players of Young Master's Elites, before finally finishing off that last bit with Eternal Dominion. Eternal Dominion had also gotten up and nodded towards the people present. Then I shall take my leave first. I'll go with you, Gufei said. I await the message of victory from the two of you, young Master Han said calmly. How many levels do we drop him by? Gufei asked, a question that was frequently fielded by professional gamers. Anything goes. Young Master Han's answer once more revealed that his reason for hiring Eternal Dominion was entirely just to embarrass Southern Lone Blade. We're leaving. Gufei got up and said to Eternal Dominion. I don't think we might be able to make it today. Eternal Dominion looked at the time. These experts all nodded knowingly. These two were indeed two peas of the same pod. They even shared their habit of logging off on time. We can first make our way to Lin Shui City. We'll do everything else we need to do tomorrow, Gu Fei. Eternal Dominion nodded, and the two men bade farewell to the others and left the tavern. Where are all your disciples? Gu Fei asked Eternal Dominion. Aren't they all the students from your bodyguard school? Eternal Dominion nodded. Most of them are. I don't think there's a need to call them. How are we gonna split the payment if over 100 of them join in? They have their own jobs anyway. It's better if they just focus on their bodyguarding career. Sounds like even you could go become one yourself. Gu Fei said. Following your boss the whole day sounds more like a nanny than a bodyguard. You don't even have time for yourself at all. How would that work? Eternal Dominion was indeed a bodyguard instructor. Given his understanding on what the job entailed, it was likely he might have once considered becoming one himself. Looks like your only option is to become a professional gamer, then. Gu Fei mused. Chapter 403, Wait Up. It was some time after Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion had left the tavern, and aside from young Master Han, who was still steadily drinking away, the others were still seated in the same places, each fallen into a dispirited state. With such people around, how are we gonna survive? War Without Wounds was the first to sigh after everyone shared a sullen moment together. Let Southern Lone Blade be the one to worry about this problem. Young Master Han said. Aren't we following them to catch the show? War Without Wounds swept his gaze over to the others present. Watching a generation of experts fall from grace seemed to be something everybody would be interested in. Let's go. Let's go take a look. RGC leapt to his feet. Don't be in such a hurry, young Master Han said. The four turned to stare at him, wondering just what sort of ploy this man was up to. Is Lin Shui City somewhere you can just visit whenever you like? Young Master Han continued. What do you mean? The four men were puzzled. Expert, we need a boat, he said sarcastically while flashing a look of contempt to the other four who were looking at him sullenly. It was clear they had thought there was some huge problem they had overlooked. Oh. The four men murmured. This was a problem often overlooked by people who were not native to Lin Shui City. So that means they. War Without Wounds was speechless. Young Master Han had already recalled this fact, yet had not bothered to remind those two. It was really abominable of him. There's no boat right now, young Master Han announced after referring to his booklet of notes. Hey ha ha ha. RGC reveled in this oversight. Sword Demon, at least, was decent enough to send Gu Fei a message about this. The two men had already stepped out of the city gates when Sword Demon's message came in. Gu Fei immediately realized this as he slapped his forehead. When would there be a boat? He asked Eternal Dominion. That's right, we'll need the ship to ferry us over. Eternal Dominion also recalled this point as he hurriedly went about to inquire after the time. He shook his head soon after. There's no way we can make it over tonight. It'll be too late. Let's deal with all this tomorrow morning. If we log on a bit earlier, can we grab the earlier scheduled ferry? Gu Fei asked. That would be a little difficult. Unless we make our way over to the pier and log off there, Eternal Dominion said. Lori City's pier was not a designated log-off zone, so there was no reason for them to risk it for this matter. Then let's do it over the weekend, then. Are you free then? Gu Fei asked. Yeah. Make it Saturday. Eternal Dominion replied. After confirming the time, the two headed back into Lori City. The experts all celebrated for Southern Lone Blade the moment they learned of this decision. His nightmare was now delayed by 2 days. Today was Thursday, so there were 2 days before Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion would descend upon him. On Saturday, Gu Fei rushed to log into Parallel World before noon arrived. Eternal Dominion had also done the same, since the two men had agreed 2 days prior to take the noon ferry and make their way over to Lin Shui City. It was instead the experts from Young Master's elites who were actually not online during this magnificent period. Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion met up before heading towards the pier together, getting on board and floating their way towards Lin Shui City. It had been 3 days since traversing 4 seas had completed their guild quest. Southern Lone Blade had also spent the last 3 days impatiently waiting for their arrival. Because the harbor at Lin Shui City was also the most bustling and busy location in the city, it was actually very convenient for them to keep watch. Every day, Southern Lone Blade and his buddies would all hurry to mix in with the tavern patrons when the time came for the scheduled ferry from Lori City to arrive, studying the players who alighted. There were plenty of people arriving on the first day. Even though the quest was over, and there was no need for the players from Yeonju-on City to gather together, they nevertheless did just that since all of them had to take a ferry on their way back. The whole crowd of them rushed out the moment the ferry docked. Southern Lone Blade and his men were already prepared for this, closely scanning the crowd for their target. But aside from Southern Lone Blade himself, none of the men with him actually know what Gu Fei looked like, so all they could do was look for any mage dressed in black robes and get Southern Lone Blade to identify the man himself. Nor could any of them rush over to any target they had potentially identified, since they had to act the part and calmly drink while still seated, so it was rather exhausting. In the end, everybody from the ship departed, yet none of the watchers managed to catch a glimpse of Gu Fei, nor any of the experts from Young Master's elites. Similarly, they did not see anyone that fit the description of any of these people on the second day. On the third day, those men got ready to watch out for the 3 scheduled ferry trips once more. There were significantly fewer players coming from Lori City, yet the target they had in mind had not yet arrived. It was some time past noon when the squad of 7 ambled towards the harbor yet again. "You're here." The barkeep by the beach warmly greeted the 7 men. Southern Lone Blade was depressed. Naturally, he did not wish to call too much attention to himself, but in order to keep watch on the arrivals, he needed to sit in the most optimal seats. In doing so, he became a frequent patron of these bars during the last 3 days. "Has the person you gentlemen are waiting for not yet arrived?" The barkeep passed off-handedly. He did not even bother to ask the 7 men what they would like to drink, as he immediately brought the same drinks that they had ordered the past 3 days. Yeah. Southern Lone Blade flashed the barkeep an awkward smile. Even his intentions were revealed. Thankfully, it was impossible for young Master Han and his men to be in contact with anyone from Linshui City, otherwise they would probably have found out about his plan. The barkeep was someone who had done plenty of jobs within the service industry, so he had a good grasp when it came to reading people's moods. He could tell from the atmosphere that he was not welcome to stay around, so he quietly retreated back to his bar after he was paid. "At this rate, it is very possible they're all together," Flame-Singed Clothes said the moment the barkeep left. Southern Lone Blade nodded. It has been 3 days, and neither Gu Fei nor any of those experts had appeared in the meantime. Given the fact they were also all friends, the likelihood that they might be traveling together was high. "In that case, we got to go with Plan B," Southern Lone Blade said. The others nodded in agreement. They had nationally expected the scenario where Gu Fei would be together with those expert friends of his, so they had already made a contingency plan for it. "This is so troublesome," the archer Glue complained as he yawned. He had not had a good night's sleep for the past 3 days. That ferry had 6 scheduled trips in a day, each about 4 apart from one another. Realistically, this meant they could only sleep for 3 hours each time since they did not wish to miss even a single arrival, making the whole situation quite the ordeal for them. "It's almost time," Southern Lone Blade said after a quick glance at the time. The other 6 men nodded as they all placed their glasses down on the table and fixed their eyes on the distant water, watching a large ferry slowly appearing. Their emotions welled up as the ship drew closer to the harbor. The ship berthed with a loud thump. The system had no fear of damaging the ship anyway, so it was rather audacious about how it handled the watercraft. The wooden boarding plank slid out from the boat as the 7 men looked on attentively. Soon, players began to step off in 3s and 2s. Finally, a player dressed in black robes appeared. The 6 men made sure that this man was not a hallucination before turning their gazes over to Southern Lone Blade. "There's no mistake about it. It's him." Southern Lone Blade sighed in relief, as a burden lifted off his chest. There was still no guarantee he would be able to beat the man, but at the very least this meant the end of their vigil. It was really quite the torment for them. "I don't see any of his companions, either." Flame-Singed Clothes was quite excited. Sword Demon, young Master Han, and the others were all very prominent characters, people who they could all identify with a single glance at the crowd. The ship is empty at the moment, yet they had not caught sight of any of them. It was Glue, who could see clearer than any of them, that added, "There's another person with him, though, but they do not seem very well acquainted with each other." "So is it Plan A or C?" the priest among the 7 asked. They had came up with 3 plans in total. Plan A was if Gu Fei traveled alone, B was if Gufei was accompanied by that bunch of experts, while plan C was if he did not travel with those experts, and was instead traveling with the A random crowd. Even though he did have someone accompanying him, it was just the one person, so there was no need to use plan C. Plan A would probably work in this case. Southern Lone Blade was about to decide what to do when his eyes involuntarily widened. Flame-singed clothes, the thief Blackwater, and the other priest were equally surprised. What's the matter? Glue was baffled. Why are they together? Southern Lone Blade was still in shock. What's the matter? Glue still could not make head or tails of the reason for their reaction. That guy with the video Mage is Eternal Dominion, Flame-singed clothes stated. Back in Lori City, Southern Lone Blade, Flame-singed clothes, Blackwater, and that priest had seen Eternal Dominion. By that time, Glue and the other 3 men from their squad had already died, so the 3 of them did not recognize him. Why would Eternal Dominion be together with him? Glue was shocked as well. Eternal Dominion's name was a symbol of invincibility in Lori City, and this rep had even made its way to Linshui City. To take on 20 all by himself, to think such a frightening entity existed. Now that Gufei was actually accompanied by such a powerful individual, it was clear that neither Plan A, nor B, much less C, would work. To think the 3 plans that they had carefully crafted would all be useless, was all due to the fact that Gufei had found himself someone they had not expected. How did they even get together like this? Weren't they fighting head to head a few days ago? Flame-singed clothes could not make sense of anything. Did a friendship blossom from the heat of battle? Someone suggested. What's the point of asking all these useless questions at this point? How are we taking them on? Blackwater turned to Southern Lone Blade for the answer. Southern Lone Blade was trying to come up with a new plan the moment he identified Eternal Dominion as the man next to their target. His mind was currently running like a CPU right now. On the other side, Eternal Dominion had immediately exclaimed when he saw the beach the moment he saw the beach in Linshui City. I finally get to see this for myself, after hearing so much about it. They do barbecued fish over there. It tastes pretty good. Gufei was a repeat customer, so he gave a quick introduction to Eternal Dominion. The 2 chatted while they walked, when they suddenly halted in their steps and looked at one another. You felt that? Gufei knew what the look Eternal Dominion was giving him meant. I felt that, Eternal Dominion agreed. Someone's really interested in us. Gufei said, as they turned their heads in the direction they sensed people watching them. They've found us. Glue yelped. What? Southern Lone Blade, who was still trying to figure out a plan, was immediately surprised by the exclamation. He raised his head and sure enough, spotted both Gufei and Eternal Dominion looking straight at them, immediately turning into the moment when both parties' eyes met. How can this be? The position these men had chosen was entirely inconspicuous. Somewhere their presence should not have been immediately discovered. How could the 2 of them immediately discover where we are the moment they disembarked from the ship? These men simply could not make sense of it. Here they come! Blackwater yelled, as Gufei and Eternal Dominion strode straight towards where they were seated. Chapter 404, Casually Strike a Pose. Southern Lone Blade was quite shocked. Gufei and Eternal Dominion had actually walked directly towards where they were positioned, which was quite the unusual move on their part. Even though Southern Lone Blade had been planning to make off with Gufei's dropped equipment for the longest time, his intention to do so had never been made known, so there was no reason Gufei should be aware that they harbored ill intent towards them. So just what was his purpose in striding over towards them like this? If he was attempting to avenge his friends, why were they not with him? There was no way he was simply passing by randomly and the thought to take revenge popped up when he spotted them. Right? Southern Lone Blade thought this was a possibility, but of course he would have never expected Gufei to come looking for him on business. And you said he was difficult to locate. This was a piece of cake. Eternal Dominion lauded as he walked over. That's what I'm telling you, there's plenty of future in this job. Gufei said. The guess that Brother Assist and the rest came up with was correct. The 7 players in Southern Lone Blade's squad were all once in the ranks of the 10 Great Adepts, but they had all lost their placing the moment they lost their lives on their trip to Lori City. Each of the 7 players were all in the same predicament, having lost a level each after their trip. But these men were still confident in themselves when it came to their own skills, Otherwise they would not have calmly continued to come up with a plan to take on the experts from young masters' elites. However, they were all caught off guard and their trains of thought were disrupted the moment they saw Eternal Dominion and Gufei's company. They no longer had time to conceive of an intricate plan, so Southern Lone Blade could only make eye contact with the other 6 men and convey accordingly: ignore Eternal Dominion and concentrate your attacks on the video mage. The 6 men nodded. Gufei and Eternal Dominion came closer to them. Even though the 7 men remained seated, Glue had already drawn his bow out in preparation while Flame-Singed Clothes had begun to recite the first spell incantation he would be using silently. Don't do anything first. When Southern Lone Blade saw the 2 ranged players with him look to be ready to deal the first strike, his hand quickly shot out to stop them and drew their attention over with his eyes. Everybody followed his gaze, and saw the men taking care of the bar coming forward to greet the 2 men. "What are you 2 gentlemen looking to order?" "Oh. That's right." Gufei suddenly remembered something. "Don't the speech here restrict players from PvPing?" The color drained from the barkeep's face and his expression hardened the moment he heard what the 2 were saying. "What business do the 2 gentlemen have with the establishment? Why can't we engage in PvP here?" Eternal Dominion asked, unprompted. "Because that would affect their business," Gufei replied. "That's right." When the barkeep heard Gufei say this, he felt he must be the more sensible of the 2, and his expression immediately softened quite a bit. "So if you are looking to fight, we hope that you 2 gentlemen could change the location of your battle." At this point, Southern Lone Blade no longer had any intention of escaping as he flashed a smirk, leering at Gufei provokingly. Naturally, this was not done without reason. He had just suddenly realized that even though it would be hasty to act here, there were benefits if a fight really went down in this place. At the very least, the 7 of them would not appear to be the antagonizers, while the 2 troublemakers Gufei and Eternal Dominion would subsequently suffer the combined wrath of the various large guilds of Linshui City hunting them down. Southern Lone Blade would obviously embrace such a chaotic scene unfolding. He loved being the fish in murky waters in such scenarios. It was precisely what his intended plan of approach had been back when he set forth for Lori City. He did not expect to come round full circle and find himself in a similar situation after his failure back then, this time in his home ground of Linshui City. Southern Lone Blade did not want to miss this opportunity, so he held his scornful gaze on Gufei in an attempt to provoke the man with that smirk. Southern Lone Blade thought to himself, someone whose park value would easily skyrocket to the tens is bound to be hot-headed, so he is sure to strike recklessly. In that case, even if the 7 of them did not retaliate, the men from the various guilds were sure to act on their behalf. Even though they might be no match for the 2 experts, it would nevertheless create that chaotic scene he yearned for. Better yet, Gufei was sure to gain more park points as a result of the battle. Park value was something any professional larcenist loved, for it helped increase their chances of getting their hands on the target's strongest equipment. Southern Lone Blade thought about how wondrous that would be, so he continued to increase his provoking gaze. He saw Eternal Dominion point at him and say, "That's Southern Lone Blade." "I know," Gufei nodded. "He's looking at you with disdain," Eternal Dominion noticed. Gufei chuckled, "He's about to die soon, I'm not bothered by him acting arrogant for a while." Southern Lone Blade felt a wave of sadness overcome him. But it was not because of Gufei's disrespect. It was because he now realized that attempting to goad this man into action would be useless, since he did not care for such trivial matters at all. As such, the chaotic scenario that he hoped would come about was not to be, in the end. But he soon heard Gufei speak to the 3 men tending the open-air bar. "Gentlemen, I guarantee we will settle our business so immaculately that it will be no trouble to your establishment." There was no way the 3 would be easily convinced by such a claim, so they shook their heads vigorously in response. Furthermore, after hearing that the man they were looking to target was Southern Lone Blade, who had another 6 men with him at the moment, they seriously doubted the fight would be as immaculate as they claimed. "We're not gonna pry into the past conflicts you 2 might have with others, but this is our place of business. So please settle your matters in some other place." The tone the barkeep kept with them was still civil. Men sure came in all varieties. Had this been a guild from Y City, they would not have wasted so many words and simply slain any interlopers on the spot instead. Gufei had hoped the man was as violent as the players of Y City, but he found it awkward to respond with violence seeing how polite he acted. "Are you certain we can't?" Gufei asked. The man shook his head. "All right then." Gufei had a helpless look, turning to leave with Eternal Dominion in tow. The three men thought the two would leave, but the moment they let their guard down, Gufei suddenly turned around, raised his sword in a slant, and pointed it towards the sky. Descending wheel of flames. Quick scram! Flame-singed clothes yelled out. In an instant, the table where the 7 players were crowding around was emptied, as Southern Lone Blade and his squad reacted quickly and evacuated the moment they heard flame-singed clothes warning. The 3 barkeepers had not expected Gufei would actually do this, and were naturally infuriated. In the end, they watched as Gufei casually returned his sword to his dimensional pocket and calmly asked, "What's wrong? Can't I just strike a pose?" The 3 men were stunned, turning around and seeing that even though the 7 men had hastily beaten the retreat in 7 different directions, there was not even a trace of flickering flames in the air. It seemed that Gufei had merely just raised his sword innocently, while the 7 men had overreacted. And since all he did was strike a pose, it was not considered to be an attempt at PvP. Nevertheless, the rules on the speech were set by the players. It was not rigid like the rules set by the system, and was far more flexible in its interpretation. Even though there was no actual attempt, Gufei's act could still be construed as troublemaking, which was still not condoned in any shape or form here. The 3 players in charge of the premises reacted accordingly. "Looks like you're here to intentionally cause trouble for us, bro." With that, other players from the other bars rushed over as well, most likely players from the guild that owned the place. Gufei shook his head in response. "Nope, I'm here to slay someone." With that, he raised his hand and abruptly disappeared. The 3 men had never seen such a strange disappearance like this in all their time playing the game and were confused as to what happened, when they suddenly heard a surprised cry from behind. The 3 men quickly turned to the origin of the cry and saw that the man whom Gufei was with had already moved close to the table while everyone was distracted by Gufei's actions. After their evasive actions in response to the spell that turned out to be a ruse, Southern Lone Blade had not even managed to calm himself when he discovered Eternal Dominion was already dashing right up to where he was, eagerly engaging him with a swing of his fist. Southern Lone Blade did not think too much on the matter, and raised his shield to block the punch. Unfortunately, the person he was fighting today was no ordinary gamer. Southern Lone Blade had raised his shield in an attempt to block, but in doing so, not only was that punch blocked, his vision was obstructed as well. He did not know that Eternal Dominion could still modify the punch he had thrown, changing into a claw as he clutched the side of the shield. In response, Southern Lone Blade activated his charge with his shield. Even though doing so reduced the distance and power behind the skill, it actually increased the area of attack applicable. When a warrior activated their charge, it was usually not done with the intention of damaging the opponent, but instead to proc the feint status onto their opponent, as well as to give a usually slow warrior a sudden burst of movement in that instant. There was no way anyone would be able to avoid a shield charge in such a close range. Unfortunately, the opponent Southern Lone Blade was facing today was Eternal Dominion. He had already anticipated Southern Lone Blade making such a move, so he immediately redirected the force of the charge at the same moment his hand grabbed onto the shield, pushing Southern Lone Blade right past him the very moment he activated his charge. Southern Lone Blade's charge struck nothing but air even as he saw a figure blur behind him, and immediately realized he was in trouble. Sure enough, before he could even turn around the moment his skill ended, Eternal Dominion had already scored a hold on his waist. Southern Lone Blade could only cry out in his head, "Oh no!" as he was flung into the air. Just as a warrior would be imbued with a burst of speed they did not possess when they used their charge, fighters would experience something similar whenever they activated their seismic toss. It did not matter how heavy the target player was, they would instantly become as light as a feather. The 3 men at the bar turned round, and saw Southern Lone Blade being tossed. Even the other 6 men of Southern Lone Blade's squad were unable to react in time, as everything happened too fast. By the time they realized something was amiss, All they saw was Eternal Dominion wrapping round behind Southern Lone Blade and getting a hold on the man in the next moment. And it was not over yet. Eternal Dominion had even specifically chosen where Southern Lone Blade would land as a result of his seismic toss, an empty clearing that would not disturb anyone. Gufei had blinked over and materialized there, even as his sword whipped out, the fiery glow that wreathed the blade flowing in a red-hot path upwards. Southern Lone Blade wanted to reach out and block it with his shield, but he had unfortunately been affected by a fighter's seismic toss, which meant Southern Lone Blade was unable to escape or even move before he landed on the ground. There was simply no way he could do anything to avoid it. Southern Lone Blade landed in a cloud of dust. Eternal Dominion was one of the 5 unyielding experts, and even though his care for his equipment was equally as nonchalant as Gufei, completely unlike the average gamer, it was at least not crude to the point it was negligible. Just from competing in so many system-assigned missions in Lori City alone had provided him with a rather splendid set of equipment, and since he was not sparring, it made sense he had them all on. In the moment Southern Lone Blade landed, he could feel his HP bar drain rapidly, even as that fiery slash came flowing past him. White light followed. Chapter 405, Rise from the Dead. If this was the real world, Southern Lone Blade's corpse would probably remain on the ground, lacerated by a sword. But thankfully, this was an MMO, so Southern Lone Blade's body was whisked away in that white light, leaving nary a trace of his presence where he once stood. Gufei calmly sheathed his sword, turned around to smile at the dumbfounded 3 men who were in charge of the bar. "See, I told you I would be quick. It wasn't any trouble for you guys, right?" The 3 were momentarily speechless. Everything had indeed happened really quickly, from the instant Gufei raised his sword angering the 3, his subsequent disappearance, and the 3 men turning to witness Southern Lone Blade getting tossed up in the air, followed by Gufei's sword cleave to end his life. Everything had happened over the course of several seconds. The players who saw the entire sequence of events seemed to have all forgotten to take a breath as they tried their best to recall what had happened. The remaining 6 men from Southern Lone Blade's squad of 7 were all at a loss. Southern Lone Blade had already died to Gufei's sword by the time they finally realized what was going on, and thought of helping their leader. Eternal Dominion did not give them any opportunity to take revenge either, as he had quickly slipped away next to Gufei after he completed his seismic toss. "See you again." Gufei even bade farewell to the 6 men, as he and Eternal Dominion proceeded to swagger off. He sent a message over the mercenary channel, "That's one time." "So soon?" Brother Assist was extremely surprised at this development. He saw that the time was not too long after they disembarked from the ferry, so could it be that Southern Lone Blade had been standing by the harbor, waiting for them to slay him? "Hey, we had quite the good luck, spotting him the moment we walked off the ship," Gufei replied. "Wait for us," young Master Han said. Everybody immediately made sense of the situation. After all, Southern Lone Blade must have been secretly waiting for their arrival, which just so happened to have allowed Gufei to expose him. But of course, the fact that Southern Lone Blade had been waiting for Gufei exclusively was a fact that the experts were unaware of. "How many times do you want him dead?" Gufei asked. Now that the job had already begun, there was no need to keep things vague. Of course they had to first understand what their job entailed. "Kill on. Just kill as much as you can." "Didn't you say it was a piece of cake?" A flippant line from young Master Han had essentially tossed Southern Lone Blade down into the bottomless ravine. It was apparent young Master Han did not have a shred of sympathy for the man. "That's true," Gufei admitted. He would not even regard Southern Lone Blade as an enemy if he was alone, much less now that he had a powerful assistant like Eternal Dominion. Gufei had been so excited about getting into this fight that he had forgotten that Eternal Dominion was supposed to be the lead here. It should be Gufei who was the assistant in this situation. "Should we keep slaying him?" Eternal Dominion asked Gufei. He was obviously unable to see the conversation happening in Gufei's mercenary channel. "Of course." Gufei nodded. "Since we're being paid, you can just kill as much as you want. This job is really too lucrative a venture." Eternal Dominion was visibly excited. "I don't know if we can intercept the man in the warrior's encampment. Let's go take a look first." Gufei had plenty of experience doing this sort of thing. At this point, anybody who had been scheming would usually have set up an encirclement in the warrior's encampment, in an attempt to wait for their prey to get themselves ensnared again. However, given how skilled and bold he was, Gufei would find nothing more enjoyable than eliminating both the target and the trap at one go, so he really could not be bothered to think too much about this. The two men left the open bar by the beach, their figures slowly getting further and further away, but the shock they had left behind with the crowd of players stayed for the longest time. This was especially true for the three men from the bar, who were looking at one another before someone finally said, "Inform the guild leader." Indeed, Gufei had been expeditious with the kill, closing the matter so quickly that there was not even time for pandemonium to set in. While his act did not even impact their business, the problem was that Gufei's action was nevertheless an infringement of the rules they had set. This was a matter of face, be it expert or guild. The more outstanding they were, the more they valued their image. Gufei had killed one of their patrons in their open-air bar by the beach. If they did not mete out any punishment for his action, it was possible for others to use this incident as an excuse to cause trouble in the future. Even if trouble did not find their way to them, all it would take was a snide remark or two, and people might mock their guild for being an entity that bullied the weak but feared the strong, creating a double standard for experts. This was something they simply could not stand for. So even though Gufei's action had not caused them any physical damage, the harm they did mentality-wise could not be discredited. The three men were well aware that this matter should not be casually handled, so they hurriedly contacted their guild leader about this, letting their leader determine the course of action. While the guild was sorting the matter on their end, Flame-Singed Clothes immediately turned to their priest the moment Gufei and Eternal Dominion departed and ordered, "Patty sent, quick." The priest's IGN was Patty Sent Pastures. He had been staring at the spot where Southern Lone Blade had disappeared, nodding slightly as he quickly strode over. He took out his magic staff and carefully drew out an array on the ground. Before pointing his magic staff on the ground, he retrieved a little booklet from his dimensional pocket with his left hand and flipped to a page before immediately beginning to chant a spell with great vigor. This strange scene caught the eye of plenty of other players. The remaining 5 players of the squad were all currently standing around Patty Sent Pastures. What are they doing? Just what is that guy there in closing saying? Could he be chanting? The posture that Patty Sent Pastures had taken looked impossible for chanting a spell, but the fact that he was reading from a booklet made it seem nondescript. Is it possible that he is chanting a long string of incantations? The intelligence displayed by the crowd was unlimited, so they were able to quickly get closer to the truth. What sort of spell is that? For the phrases of this incantation to be so long that the players themselves were unable to remember, it went to show that it truly had to be a remarkable spell. At the moment, all the players were staring at the position where the priest was attempting to cast his spell when finally someone guessed, could it be? A white light flashed. A barely perceptible cloud of white light floated at the space where Patty Sent Pastures had pointed his staff. This layer of light soon emitted a flash, so glaring that people instinctively shut their eyes. Fortunately, this flash of light had disappeared entirely in the next moment, as Southern Lone Blade reappeared in that space in the same pose he was in before he died. Blackwater was already by his side physically supporting him as Flame-Singed Clothes handed him a bread and fruit. Southern Lone Blade took them, sighing before looking all around him. "They're gone?" The 6 men nodded. Patty Sent Pastures stowed that booklet of his and hurriedly picked out a fruit to consume. Southern Lone Blade stared at the countless strange stares around them and sighed again. Did all these players witness it? The 6 of them nodded reluctantly. Resurrection. To think the effect of that long incantation, which Patty Sent Pastures had trouble remembering in its entirety, was actually a resurrection spell. This was a spell never mentioned in the officially released information provided by the game company. Players had thought that the spell did not exist in Parallel World. These players from Linshui City that had just personally witnessed the entire process of the resurrection spell were also flabbergasted at the moment. They were truly at a loss for words now that they had suffered through 2 stupefying instances, one after the other. "Let's take our leave first." Southern Lone Blade did not even bother to consume the food he was given as he gathered the others to leave. Innocent commoners might be implicated for harboring a fugitive king. Southern Lone Blade and his men were all professional larcenists, so they were more than well aware of the logic behind this. The full name for this resurrection skill in Parallel World was Rise from the Dead, a skill that only light priests could learn. The priest job class was that of a nursemaid, but the moment they had access to a skill with a resurrection effect, they would become gods. Even though the entire process of rise from the dead looked troublesome, and it would take a very long time to complete the incantation, the value that this spell would provide was immense considering the loss of level and experience that parallel world imposed upon death. Players that were resurrected through Rise of the Dead would be completely exempted from the penalties of death. Of course, this would not include the loss of equipment, money, or any other items as a result of death. These worldly possessions would be picked up by others, so there was no way they would be resurrected along with the player. With such a powerful skill, the cooldown was also very powerful as well, requiring up to 12 hours before the next time it could be cast. The time was cumulatively calculated, so that meant any intention to log in and out of the game would not reset this timer. There were also prerequisites from the player the spell was cast on as well. First, the death could not have passed the 5-minute mark before it was cast. Second, the player must not leave the spawn point after death. And third, the player in question had to accept the system prompt when the spell was activated. That was the reason why these men had decided to use this skill the moment they saw Gufei and Eternal Dominion leave in a hurry after slaying Southern Lone Blade. After all, dropping from level 40 to 39 and level 41 to 40 were two entirely different matters, given how much greater the experience loss a level 41 would incur losing the level. The seven hastily left the beach under the intense gazes of the players present. Southern Lone Blade and his men did not have a shred of doubt that it would take no more than several days for all the players in Parallel World to learn of the existence of a resurrection spell in the game. Such a powerful skill would not be coveted by priests alone, as even those teams that had a dedicated priest attached to them would also want their priest to get a hold of such a skill. Logically speaking, such a skill could not be stolen, but the problem was that players who were well versed in MMO knew that a spell that did not exist in the skill tree that was officially released would usually be from a skill scroll or spell from an equipment. Unfortunately, Patty St. Pasture's Rise of the Dead was a spell that came from his magic staff, the Staff of Resurrection. Given Southern Lone Blade and his squad's knowledge and position when it came to larceny, he dared surmise that it would take no more than 5 days, for there to be someone who would look to hire them to search for the Staff of Resurrection. Southern Lone Blade could only grimace when he thought of this. Obviously, he would have plenty of excuses to reject this particular request, but there was no way of knowing if a fellow larcenist might come knocking on their door. Southern Lone Blade had not heard of another team of larcenists as highly respected as theirs, but he had no doubt that they existed out there. For both parties to meet up in such a manner, it was best to leave discussion of this matter for another time. Right now, he needed to continue the task at hand. By now, the 7 of them were already nearing the city gate nearest to the beach. The 2 of them looked to be targeting me, Southern Lone Blade said. The 6 nodded. There was no need to discuss how obvious they were in confronting Southern Lone Blade directly in an effort to kill just him. In that case, they will surely be over in the warriors' encampment, looking to intercept me, Southern Lone Blade said. He now has 1 park point, so we should find a way to further increase his park value, to better save us time and effort. Chapter 406, Haloboat Lori City. The other 6 experts that formed Young Master's elites had gathered in full force, and quite a few of them bore the same look of distaste. Why are you instructing him to kill him as much as possible? Royal God Call asked Young Master Han, his expression showing much sorrow. Everybody could not help but recall that time back in the game's beta period. No Smile was considered to be a character of certain repute, who ended up losing a whole 8 levels because no one had specified how many times they wanted him dead. To think Young Master Han had actually said as much as you can. Everyone imagined a scene where Southern Lone Blade would be standing stark naked on the spawn point, standing with just his shadow as company, as hateful tears rolled down his cheeks. Actually, everybody would gladly witness such a scene, but they would have to pay an exorbitant price for this show of force. Under Young Master Han's strong encouragement, Southern Lone Blade was sure to drop by 20 or even 30 levels, and they would be the ones paying for it. Thinking of this, the few of them clutched their money pouches tightly, even as their hate towards Young Master Han deepened further. Why would Southern Lone Blade be as foolish as No Smile? Cynicism dripped in Young Master Han's words. To be fair, No Smile was not dumb, either. But it was still early in the game's infancy, so he was entirely unaware of Gufei's game-breaking level of prowess, which resulted in his fall from grace. There was no reason for Southern Lone Blade to make the same mistake, especially now that he had just lost a level. There was no way he would be just like No Smile Bach then and inadvertently attempt to seek revenge. Southern Lone Blade is a conscientious man. It is very likely that Miles just caught him off guard with how quickly he was taken down. Once bitten, twice shy, I doubt he will give him another chance. Brother Assist was ultimately a friend of Southern Lone Blade, so he at least had some understanding of how he worked. However, this friendship of theirs was probably dead in the water by now. That's why we got to hurry. Southern Lone Blade must have originally set up a trap for us, but Miles will most likely have made a mess of things for him. What else are we waiting for if we don't capitalize on it now? Young Master Han lifted his priest robes the moment he said this and began to make his way out of Lori City. Only then did the other four came to a start. It turned out that young Master Han had not hired Eternal Dominion just to watch the ensuing spectacle, but his intention was to draw Southern Lone Blade's attention away from them, allowing them to disembark without any trouble. It seemed as if this grievance between the two parties would still be settled by their own hands. After all, these men were all invigorated now that they had such thoughts in mind. Royal God Call slung on his 3 bows as he bolted out of Lori City. This was how he dressed now. During battle, these bows would be stashed in his dimensional pocket, since retrieving them from his dimensional pocket was a lot easier than from his back. Let's go. Sword Demon and War Without Wounds looked at one another, nodded and walked after them. Brother Assist was now the last one hesitating. As he quickly tried to catch up, he shouted, "So where are we going now? Where's the ferry?" "I've already contacted them." Walking in front of everyone, young Master Han waved his hand as he replied. "Contacted who?" Brother Assist was nonplussed. The other 3 naturally had no idea as well, so all they could do was follow young Master Han. Approaching Lori City's sparse pier, the 4 immediately spotted a small wooden boat half beached by the shore where the system ferry would be docked, with a player lying on it comfortably. That man immediately stood up when he saw the 5 of them approaching, clambering off the boat and quickly walking over to young Master Han. "Hello there." Without confirming anyone's identity, this man had confidently came forth to greet young Master Han. Even though he had never met him before this very second, he was certain that this was the man he was waiting for, because the fellow looked far too outstanding. Young Master Han merely nodded. The 4 men had rushed up by now asking, "What's this?" "A boat I hailed from Lin Shui City," young Master Han pointed. "You can do that?" They all stared at that wooden boat. "How else did you think Deep Waters and the others got here?" Young Master Han retorted. "Oh, did he help you get in contact with this guy?" "There's no need for that. There was already a business set up over at Lin Shui City." Young Master Han had noticed there were players selling their ferry services when he had been drinking by the beach, thus he already gotten the man's contact information in preparation for hailing his services the moment they'd needed it. "Let's go." Young Master Han gestured everyone to board the watercraft. "Wait a minute." The boatman suddenly interrupted. "This boat can only take 5 players." The 5 men all froze. They halted in their steps as they regarded the size of the boat. They did not feel the man was making a false claim about the boat's capacity. "Oh, we'll take care of it ourselves." Young Master Han smiled. "Here, take the money first." Young Master Han handed the coin pouch over, much to the man's surprise. They did not have the rule to pay for tickets prior to boarding, and most players would only pay up after they got to the destination. Naturally, the boatman would not reject being paid first, so he took it and counted the coins within. He nodded once to make sure the amount was right, raising his head to find that the other 4 players were already on board his boat and had even pushed it off into the water. "Aren't you riding the boat?" The boatman was shocked. He never expected that the person being left out of this trip would be the person who had employed his services. "Oh no." Young Master Han smiled warmly. "You're the one who's not riding." "What?" The boatman's mouth hung agape. Young Master Han had already turned and was walking towards the boat as he replied, "We'll leave your boat by Lin Shui Harbor." "You can't take the system ferry service back yourself." "You've gotta be kidding me." The boatman was pissed. He never expected this would be how the capacity issue would be settled. He rushed over wanting to pull young Master Han, when he suddenly heard the sound of an arrow whistle right past his ear, and felt a sharp pain come from it. He turned his head over and saw that the archer on the boat was now directing his arched bow at him. "Do you wish to be sent back to Lin Shui City in the fastest way, instead?" "We don't really mind." Young Master Han turned to him and chuckled. "You guys." The boatman was really in tears. He never thought something like this would happen to him. "We're in a rush, so we're not gonna stay here any longer. We'll be leaving the boat over by Lin Shui City." Sword Demon was far more sympathetic when he addressed the man, as War Without Wounds stifled a laugh. He was going to be in charge of rowing the boat, as this wooden boat was powered by paddles. With a strong push of his both arms, the little boat left the shore and drifting away. "Thanks a lot." The others on the boat who were not busy rowing waved their hands at the boatman, even as the man stood there by the shore. Lin Shui City. Southern Lone Blade had expected Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion would head over to the warriors' encampment to find him, yet the 7-man squad was not in a hurry to make their way over. Instead, he fired off a message instead. Gu Fei had already offended quite a few people here in Lin Shui City, and these people just so happened to be in the same line of work as Southern Lone Blade. Right now, Southern Lone Blade very kindly revealed to these fellow colleagues, Warriors' encampment. "I think that Mage looked to be headed towards the Warriors' encampment." These groups of insiders did not just wish to slay Gu Fei in an effort to regain their pride, but they were also very interested in acquiring Gu Fei's unknown equipment. Furthermore, the player that Southern Lone Blade had contacted knew he was not someone that would rob anyone like them, and was someone who would only act upon targets when they had a buyer, so they did not see a reason to doubt the veracity of the information he disclosed. Just like that, these men were happily betrayed to the #1 slayer of Parallel World by Southern Lone Blade's own hands. Gathering their manpower took some time. They could only get 5 players to reach the warriors' encampment on short notice. Those men were nationally very familiar with what Gu Fei could do and simply did not dare to challenge Gu Fei lightly. However, these 5 men had now spotted the black-robed mage and a fellow fighter striding overconfidently towards the warriors' encampment. "God damn it! How much longer till you guys get here?" The 5 were afraid of losing this rare opportunity. Finding a particular person across all of Parallel World was not an easy task. Some replied with soon, while others said in a minute. Then there were those that could not make it because they had already taken the ferry out to their grinding zone far away. They would not be able to get back anytime soon, so they might as well not respond. "That mage is not alone. He has a fighter with him." The 5 men conveyed this information to the rest now that they had a clear understanding of the situation. "How's the equipment on this fighter?" They were greedy despite not even being here yet. If they knew that the fighter they were up against was Eternal Dominion, they would most likely have thought otherwise. That was the reason why Southern Lone Blade had kindly not told them about this, so they would not change their mind. "I'll check it out." One of the 5 volunteered. Most of them had already seen Gu Fei, but there was no way Gu Fei would be able to recognize them all. Thus, this man was not really afraid that the mage would be able to identify him. With that, the man walked down that street like he was just another player, and was soon walking past Eternal Dominion and Gu Fei. He deftly activated his appraisal skill on Eternal Dominion. Failed. He did not give up, furtively following behind the 2-man as he tossed out his appraisal skill once more. Failed yet again. "What's going on?" that person mused to himself as he tried for the 3rd time. He was very confident when it came to his proficiency at the appraisal skill. Nevertheless, he was still met with failure. The man was stunned. He could only come to a single conclusion at this point. This man's level was higher than his. He was level 40, so would that not mean this fighter was actually level 41? Level 41 was not really a level that was worth getting excited over, but the problem was that it was a fighter who was level 41. There were not many who picked the fighter job class in the game, so that nationally meant the number of experts in this particular subset were few as well. The level of those late adopters of Parallel World were still below average, so there were really just a handful of level 41 expert fighters, with a grand total of 4 at the moment. Thus, the quality of the top 10 fighters was considered to be the lowest out of all the job classes, with quite a few players who were merely level 40 taking a spot. To think he would actually bump into a level 41 fighter. He had very good reasons to believe this man was Eternal Dominion, Given how Lori City was adjacent to theirs, it made more sense for someone from a neighboring city to appear here than someone else who hailed from who knew where else. This player was just about to relay this information to his fellow men when he realized that both the mage and fighter had already turned around to stare at him. "What are you following us for?" Eternal Dominion asked. "Ah, your Eternal Dominion?" The man was at least quick-witted enough, suddenly asking the man a question directly. "That's right. You recognize me?" It was indeed Eternal Dominion. That man was shocked, as his face faked a look of excitement. "It really is you. You are like my idol." Saying such a line would explain why he had been secretly tracking them. Chapter 407, Not daring to act. Any MMO was bound to have job classes that came with their own unique characteristics, and from there a curious phenomenon would appear. Players from different job classes would habitually voice out the weaknesses of their own job classes and which aspect of their kit was trash. However, this would only be something only players that had picked the same job class could bemoan. For example, archers would often complain about how helpless they were in close combat, but if a fighter were to mention how he could easily trounce an archer, this person would succumb under the harried refutations from the archers, raising hundreds of different scenarios where the fighter would be taken down instead. This situation was quite like how a child would not allow any outsider to insult their own household. From Gufei and other martial practitioners' perspective, this was akin to being prejudiced against people from another sect. As such, it was a very strange thing to see anyone worshipping somebody from another job class. Eternal Dominion could clearly tell that the twerp before him was an archer, and he found it extremely surprising for this kid to idolize a fighter. Shocked as he was, Eternal Dominion still made sure to express his gratitude. That person searched for his words as he continued to gush and shower Eternal Dominion with praise, even while he continued to deliver this new information over to his teammates about the fighter's identity. Unexpectedly, it was Gufei who was beside Eternal Dominion that cut in. "Since you're such a big fan of his, why don't you get him to sign something for you?" That twerp froze, but immediately nodded. "Oh yes, that's great." Eternal Dominion was not a superstar or anything, so when would he have had the experience giving his signature to others? He scratched the back of his ear in embarrassment, annoyed at Gufei for putting him on the spot for this. He had no choice but to take the quill and booklet from the man, and signed his name off on it properly. When he was done, he felt that the signature did not seem to be eye-catching enough, and that it looked particularly muted, thinking to himself that he'd better make some time in the future to practice it. Gufei had also came over to take a look, chuckling as he passed it over to that player and said, "Look, I got you a signature from your idol. To show your gratitude, why don't you tell us where Southern Lone Blade is?" "What?" That player looked to have been struck by a twin winds penetrating through the ears, his ears still ringing when he heard what Gufei said. Southern Lone Blade was a professional larcenist. Not many people knew this fact, but it just so happened that this archer was among that exclusive group. At the same time, Southern Lone Blade happened to be the same person that had directed them to head over to the warriors' encampment. So, the moment he heard Gufei mention that IGN, the first thought that crossed his mind was that their scheme had fallen through. "It's over," that player thought to himself. As an archer, he currently had two players right in front of him. Just how was he going to get away? The man was pondering over this fact even as he replied to Gufei, "Haha, Southern Lone Blade? Isn't he over there?" That twerp pointed somewhere behind the two men. Gufei and Eternal Dominion both turned round to look, as the man used this chance to make a break for it. Archers were extremely confident when it came to fleeing. The moment the man realized that old trick of his worked on the two of them, he commended himself for his convincing acting skill and quick thinking. However, before he could take more than 2 steps, the sight before him suddenly turned black, and a man stood firmly right in front of him. Before the fleeing archer could stop himself, the person in front of him had already delivered a kick to him. The archer took several steps back from the blow, and felt someone grab onto his shoulder. Without even turning around to look, his world flipped and he next found himself flat on his back on the ground. Eternal Dominion pressed the kid down to the ground, while Gufei walked over with a smile. "Don't you want your signature?" With that, He stuffed the booklet and pen which Eternal Dominion had used into the man's pocket. In Parallel World, while other players were unable to pick out items from other players' dimensional pockets, they were allowed to put items in. Now that he was held hostage by the mage and the fighter, this archer no longer held any hopes for escape. Without saying a word, all he could do was subconsciously glance at his other 4 compatriots, over by the warriors' encampment. Unfortunately, this glance of his was caught by Gufei, who quickly traced it to its destination and noticed there were 4 nervous players watching this entire sequence of events unfold. They must be his colleagues, Gufei concluded. Logically speaking, if they were merely onlookers, the only expression they would be showing would be curiosity and confusion, not concern and nervousness. Going with this thought, Gufei strode towards that corner of the encampment. The 4 men saw this, and quickly retreated into the designated safe zone. They had already received the message from that archer and were aware that the fighter accompanying Gufei was the legendary fighter Eternal Dominion from Lori City, the very man who could take on 20 men all by himself. This only made them more cautious of messing around here, coming to the swift conclusion they should retreat and avoid this confrontation even as they told their other comrades to hurry. When Eternal Dominion saw Gufei leave, he followed right behind him. That archer raised himself slightly off the ground and scratched his head, absolutely confounded by all this. Departing so strangely and without a word, was he out of the woods or not? Had this all just been a dream? That man pinched himself and felt that sharp pain, pulled himself upright on the ground and stared blankly at Gufei and Eternal Dominion as they made their way towards the warriors' encampment. The moment the 4 men huddling by the warriors' encampment realized that Gufei had spotted them, they figured they might as well retreat. There was nothing anybody could do to them in the designated safe zones. Anyway, the 4 held their weapons tightly to their chests as they silently watched Gufei walk over to them. "Goddamn, we're clearly in a safe zone, so why are we still so nervous?" The 4 of them could not make sense of their own reactions themselves. "I believe the lot of you are friends of Southern Lone Blade, as well?" Gufei asked. Gufei had concluded that Southern Lone Blade would have something set up for them over here, and the moment they accosted that archer who was sneaking around behind them, he was certain that this man must be working together with Southern Lone Blade, as well. While these guesses Gufei had made were correct, he did make a mistake. Southern Lone Blade did not have that many accomplices. His band of bandits were just the 7-man squad he led. Gufei had thought that the pirates on the water near Linshui City and the ruffians on the streets were all under one roof, when really they each hailed from different parties. Those that were currently here before him just so happened to be a party that Southern Lone Blade was in contact with, who knew they were also interested in acquiring Gufei's equipment. Gufei had made a wrong move trying to find out where Southern Lone Blade was located through them. Furthermore, while that archer from before seemed to know Southern Lone Blade, these 4 men were actually only aware that Southern Lone Blade was the warrior that had just fallen off from the ranks of the 5 unyielding experts. They had no idea that the man was actually someone in the same line of business as they were. Since they did not really know the man, there was naturally no reason for them to hide anything. Hearing Gufei ask such an abnormal question, every single one of them had only confusion and doubt etched on their faces. When Gufei saw this, he immediately sensed that the 4 were not associated with Southern Lone Blade. He was slightly disheartened, while at the same time finding it strange. He turned back once more and saw that Eternal Dominion was right behind him, while that archer had already came to his senses and crawled away without a trace. "Why did you let him go?" Gufei asked. "Would you rather I pin him down on the ground all this while?" "That's just so unsightly," Eternal Dominion answered. Indeed, it was not in the least bit difficult for Gufei to stand there asking this question. Meanwhile, pinning the man on the ground the whole time without saying a word or doing anything would seem really embarrassing, and it was not something that he cared to do. Gufei had no choice either, turning over to say to the 4-man, "Quick, get the rest of your men over here. We'll be waiting over here." Staring at the 2 men brimming with confidence, the 4 relayed what Gufei said over the mercenary channel. However, when the rest heard that Eternal Dominion was the fighter in this duo, all of them hesitated. Legend had it that this man alone could fight against more than 20 foes at one go, while the mage they were after seemed capable of achieving a similar feat. Now that they were working together, It seemed like they simply did not have enough manpower to take the two down at all. Adding to the fact that the two were apparently inviting them to fight, every one of them felt all the more stupid if they served themselves up and died for nothing. "Let's give up for now." The leader spoke. "To think that guy actually got an eternal dominion to be his bodyguard. We just don't have the numbers right now, so we'll let them go for now." Everybody nodded in agreement, each showing their support to their leader's decision. As such, it was the four men who had arrived at the warriors' encampment first who got the short end of the stick. Eternal Dominion and Gufei were like two mighty deities, standing there outside the spawn point. Would they not be dead the moment they stepped out? But staying in the safe zone was no solution, either. Mulling over this quagmire, they decided to simply just log out instead. When Gufei saw that there was no one new coming, he quickly realized that the four men he cornered had actually opted to log out. He concluded that their opponent must have decided to give up this time, and since Southern Lone Blade was not there either, he was at a momentary loss as to what his next step should be. Obviously, he had no idea that Southern Lone Blade had already been risen from the dead and was elsewhere, so he simply supposed that the man must have departed from the warriors' encampment the moment he spawned. "We've only killed him once. How much money would that be?" Eternal Dominion could not find Southern Lone Blade, and had no idea where he could be, so all he could do was ask how much he had earned thus far, wondering if he had earned enough that he could just call it quits here and then. "How would I know?" "You can discuss this matter properly with them after you return." This was a question that concerned their treatment to Eternal Dominion. Gufei felt that it was best if Eternal Dominion settled this by himself. Of course, the more complex and deeper reasoning behind this was really because Gufei had no idea about the in-game economy itself. He did not know what the market rate for killing off a high-level player like Southern Lone Blade. "So what now?" "Now? We'll walk around randomly then. Perhaps we might get lucky and encounter him again like last time," Gufei said helplessly. Over on the other side, the 6 men with Southern Lone Blade were making their way to the warriors' encampment, intentionally taking their time. When he reckoned it was about time, Southern Lone Blade sent a message to that friend of his. "So, how was it? Was that guy there?" "He was," that man sighed. "But we didn't go ahead with it." "Why not?" "That guy had actually invited Eternal Dominion along with him," his friend explained. "Eternal Dominion? No way." Southern Lone Blade had not expected they would actually recognize Eternal Dominion, so he could only act surprised. "You guys know what he looks like?" "Not really." But a comrade went to find out more and confirmed that it was indeed the man himself. The man answered. "Did you lose anyone?" Southern Lone Blade was really hopeful when he asked this question. "Thankfully, we didn't," that man affirmed. "That's good, then." Southern Lone Blade cursed the man's ancestors endlessly in his heart. "So what do you guys intend to do next?" Southern Lone Blade probed. We don't really have enough manpower with us now. We'll have to wait until our brothers return from grinding before we make a decision." The man answered, apparently not intending to ask Southern Lone Blade to help them. Since they were all in the same profession, they were ultimately rivals. Conversing with one another facetiously like this was merely giving face to one another, but when it came to their vested interests, it was better if they prioritized themselves. Both parties were aware of this logic, which was why both men ended their exchange there and then. "So how did it go?" His 6 comrades were standing next to him, waiting for the news. "God damn it! They didn't go ahead and attack. Those guys are so useless, running away with their tails between their legs when they saw Eternal Dominion," Southern Lone Blade cursed. Chapter 408, Reinforcements have arrived. Gufei and Eternal Dominion were strolling about in Linshui City, hoping to coincidentally bump into Southern Lone Blade in such a manner, but it was clear that was impossible. Over by Southern Lone Blade's side, they could not find any trace of Gufei and Eternal Dominion when they arrived at the warriors' encampment, which resulted in both parties losing track of the other. In comparison, it was instead Southern Lone Blade who was pressed, for his business rested on him being able to take Gufei's head squarely off his shoulders. But now that he understood Gufei had came searching for him, he was not exactly anxious. At the very least, Gufei should not be in a rush to leave Linshui City. It was just that he felt quite troubled as he currently had no idea where to locate the man, nor had he thought of a plan to deal with the duo. While these men were all uncertain about how to carry on from this point, The 5 other experts from Young Master's elites were finally nearing the coast on that little wooden boat they had commandeered. "Where are we leaving the boat?" War Without Wounds asked. "Anywhere would do." Young Master Han was entirely unconcerned. In the end, it was the honest sword demon, aided by War Without Wounds, who dragged the boat ashore, leaving it at a most conspicuous spot before informing some of the players nearby who were tending to an open-air bar of the matter. Their voices were loud when they did this, allowing plenty of the players around them to hear their conversation. At that rate, they figured there would not be anyone out there who would try to attempt anything fishy in public view of everybody present. Soon after, the 2 men chased after the others, who had already set off. Young Master Han and Brother Assist were near the harbor trying to gather some news from the players passing time nearby. Sure enough, as they had expected, whenever Gufei acted, he was bound to attract the attention of others, and they found out what had happened. But more importantly, they were able to learn about how Southern Lone Blade was resurrected, as well. To think there really is a resurrection skill. Brother Assist mused, pulling out his booklet to make a note of it, even as he attempted to learn from the person they had inquired from what this person looked like. He was a priest. Those were the only 4 words they could extract from the man after asking repeatedly. Brother Assist left to find out more about this priest. He believed that given the fact there were so many people in the crowd, he was positive that quite a lot must have attempted to use their appraisal skill on him. Fortunately, none of those players around held back, allowing Brother Assist to jot down the following. The man had the usual equipment one would see from experts, but no one was able to glean any information about that magic staff he was holding. "It looks like that must be a top-grade item. A powerful skill like resurrection would most likely be something that originated from that magic staff." The others nodded in agreement. By now, they had already attracted another group's attention with what they were doing. A thief dressed in blue was already approaching the 5 experts with a group of men in tow. "Gentlemen," this man had came forward and greeted the 5. All of them glanced over at him in unison. "My name stands in Nightshade, the guild leader of Linshui City's Blue Umbra Guild," the man introduced himself. "Hello," the 5 men greeted him, even as Brother Assist provided greater detail from the sidelines. "Tanzanite Shade is one of the 10 great adepts from the Thief Leaderboard, currently ranked 6th. I've made a fool of myself," Tanzanite Shade chuckled. The moment Brother Assist pointed out his rank, he had no choice but to acknowledge his fame. Being placed so highly on the leaderboard could be considered an honorable achievement, so of course he would be more than happy for others to mention this. Tanzanite Shade instantly met Brother Assist's gaze, feeling that the man looked far more pleasing to the eye than before. Brother Assist's vast array of friendships he had made with players in the game was not coincidental. He often gave others a good impression as a result of similar situations. "How should I address everyone here?" Tanzanite Shade stopped smiling as he changed the topic to find out where these 5 men came from. However, he could not help but feel smaller in comparison as the 5 men introduced themselves. By the time they were all done, he felt he was no taller than a dwarf. Out of these 5, 4 were also part of the 10 adepts themselves, while each of their IGNs were famous in the gaming community. Tanzanite Shade was merely just one of the top 10 in Parallel World. The pride he had in his 6th place no longer relevant in the face of these men. At least he quickly recalled his reason for presenting himself like so and hastily said, "I've heard so much about you," as he got to the crux of his question. "I heard that you guys were all inquiring after a certain matter?" The 5 experts saw no reason to conceal this fact now that they had been actively asking so many questions all this while, so they nodded. Tanzanite Shade proceeded to ask, "I wonder if you 5 gentlemen are related to the 2 from before?" Young Master Han saw no reason to lie. "We're hunting them." "Oh, I wonder just who are you guys looking to kill?" Young Master Han's answer was even more brazen, "Everyone, of course." It was now young Master Han's turn to ask the questions after he answered. "Are they friends with Blue Umbra?" The truth was, young Master Han knew that was not the case. He knew the rules of the open-air bar by the beach like the back of his hand, and easily surmised that they must have needed to take a course of action now that the 2 parties had decided to clash on their turf. Had they been friends with either side, there would not have been a need for him to appear. "Oh no, they simply broke the rules when they fought here by our bar, so we got to mete out punishment for them." The answer that Tanzanite Shade gave was entirely what young Master Han had expected. Ah, so that's how it is. In that case, I hope Guild Leader Shade would be willing to share any information if you have anything regarding these men. Young Master Han smiled pleasantly. Of course. There was no reason for Tanzanite Shade to reject aid from experts like them, so he was quick to accept the offer, adding each other to their respective friends list with great affection. HMPH. That was when a cold snort could be heard, causing all these men to turn and spot Sakurazaka Muni and his men. That snort actually came from the only lady in this party, Vast Lushness. Back to your old tricks again. Vast Lushness commented with disdain when she saw them staring at her. Most had not seen this scene before, but young Master Han had essentially used the same method to trick Vast Lushness in Y City back then. While the situation with Tanzanite Shade might be a little different, the implication of his actions remained the same. The men of young Master's elites all felt a little awkward now that the previous victim of young Master Han's schemes had actually watched it unfold again. It was only the perpetrator himself who revealed nary a change of emotion, and merely smiled. Ah, what a coincidence. That statement held a double meaning to it, pointing out how coincidental it was for them to bump into Vast Lushness and the men from the Great Hunting, while also pointing out how coincidental it was that the victim Vast Lushness who once more saw the scheme at work. Ultimately, young Master Han seemed entirely unperturbed by all of this. Vast Lushness pouted, yet she did not say another word. Friends of yours? Tanzanite Shade did not seem to have found anything suspicious from this exchange between the two. We're both from Yunjuan City, young Master Han replied. Barkeep, let's have an open bar. The drinks are all on me. Tanzanite Shade attempted to curry favor with such a grand gesture. A huge crowd of players cheered at this. There were quite a lot of players who were with Sakurazaka Muni, totaling 40 at the moment. Not a single one of them had dropped the quest, so they had all gathered to make their way back to their home city. They were quite possibly one of the most united mercenary groups around. Even the 6 men from young Master's elites could not be compared to them, since the nonconformist Gufei would often be off doing his own thing. That's a lot of you. Tanzanite Shade's lips trembled. He. Young Master Han laughed dryly. Guild Leader Shade, why don't you just tell us what you've found out thus far? It was apparent they were not intending to stay around to share a drink, talking as they made their way towards Linshui City. What's the matter? Those guys seem to be in trouble. Sakurazaka Muni and his men had begun discussing the matter. Did Drunk Bro slay someone again? Fireball had made the correct assumption, as expected from the person who first met Gufei. They had all taken a tour around the city before they ended up at the bar by the beach, so they had not seen Gufei fighting. If it's Drunk Bro, then we gotta lend him a hand. Sakurazaka Muni said. Yeah, but we won't interfere if it's that guy, Fireball quipped. Vast Lushness followed his gaze and saw he was pointing towards young Master Han, and felt a slight release in her heart. Why do you guys hate that guy? Look at just how he looks, but turned out to be a man. It's like a slap to our naked passion. Fireball angrily blurted out. Well said, Fireball. Everyone clapped, and someone even wolf whistled. Fucking hell, Vast Lushness cursed in her heart. She knew just how lewd these men were, so why did she even expect to be able to discuss any sort of thoughtful questions? Let's follow and take a look. Sakurazaka Muni got up. But those guys said they are treating us to drinks. That man looked to be the owner of this bar. Some of them were somewhat unwilling to leave. Take it to go. Sakurazaka Muni ordered. Considering how shameless and skeevy these men were, was there anything they would not dare to do? Of course they were unabashed as they took their drinks to go. Because their guild leader had already given the order, the barkeep and staff had no choice but to take the losses from this trade. Thankfully they came with the idea of telling them they were out of liquor to sell, so at least these men did not end up taking their whole stock with them. Tanzanite Shade nearly spat out blood when he got the message. Is something the matter, Guild Leader Shade? The observant brother assist saw that Tanzanite Shade looked ill. I'm fine. Tanzanite Shade hurriedly waved his hand. Through this, Tanzanite Shade swore to never curry favor randomly again. Guild Leader Shade, why don't you tell us your planned formation? Tanzanite Shade had been interrupted when he received that blood vomiting news. Oh right. I'll continue. Tanzanite Shade said. Those two guys have both entered the city. On the basis that they are off to hunt down their target, the mage and fighter are sure to head over to the warriors' encampment after slaying Southern Lone Blade, because they are unaware that the man has actually been resurrected by his comrades. Everybody nodded. Southern Lone Blade was likely to have shared the same thought as they did, so if he intends to take revenge, he will surely have made his way over there, as well. However, according to the info my men had gathered over there was apparently a small kerfuffle over by the warriors' encampment that the fighter and mage caused, yet Southern Lone Blade was nowhere in sight, Tanzanite Shade narrated. So where did they go? Young Master Han asked. We're not too sure either, but I've already given their description to all of our men, so someone is sure to report in the moment they are spotted, Tanzanite Shade said. Yeah, young Master Han nodded even as he fired off a message to Gufei. Change your clothes. What for? There's a guild hot on both your trail. Keep a low profile. Oh. The main reason Gufei had come here was to help Eternal Dominion find a way to make a living out of Parallel World. While he would have loved to take on a guild, he felt that tagging on the new problem they had just encountered would only further complicate things, so he decided to take young Master Han's advice and changed his robes. Also, young Master Han said, tell Eternal Dominion that Southern Lone Blade has not died, so he has not actually earned a single cent at the moment. Chapter 409, Induction. How is that possible? Gufei had killed plenty of times in Parallel World, and the obvious manner in which each player disappeared upon death was impossible to miss. The priest in that 7-man squad of his has a spell that resurrects. They proceeded to do just that the moment you two left, young Master Han told Gufei. There's actually such a thing. Gufei muttered. You've yet to complete your mission. Keep at it. Young Master Han said. This message was really diabolical. Gufei had originally thought that he had successfully slain Southern Lone Blade, so any additional deaths they laid upon him would merely be icing on the cake, a pursuit of entertainment. It was not something that he would strive to achieve. But now that everything had turned out to be for naught, he instantly had that same anxiety Southern Lone Blade shared in finding the other party. What's the matter? Why are you changing your robes? Eternal Dominion was still wondering about this very superficial question. Southern Lone Blade's not dead yet, Gufei told him the bad news. What? How's that possible? Eternal Dominion was just like everybody else, believing what he witnessed to be true. They have a resurrection spell on them. They revived him the moment we left, Gufei explained. Who said that? Eternal Dominion asked. Gufei's heart palpitated the moment he heard this. He was right. This was young Master Han they were talking about. What would this guy not do just to short them on the payment? Everybody should have their guard up when dealing with that man, and what was more. Before Gufei could even finish that thought, young Master Han had already followed up with another message. We've already arrived at Linshui City, so you guys better hurry up. We're not gonna pay you anything if we end up killing him ourselves. Ha 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 ha. Ugh, that's way too diabolical. You already said you're leaving him to us. Gufei was incensed. What's the matter? Eternal Dominion was still lost. Those guys have already reached Linshui City, and they are now on the trail looking for Southern Lone Blade themselves, Gufei said. What? How could they do that? Didn't they already say they were leaving that man to us? Eternal Dominion was also pissed off. They were indeed two peas of the same pod, equally valuing good faith and promises. They were the antithesis of what young Master Han was, who was even capable of selling himself out if the need arose. Then we better hurry and find him. Eternal Dominion was flustered. Wait a minute. Gufei said. Eternal Dominion turned to look at Gufei. We cannot continue searching for him like this, Gufei thought aloud. The city is huge, who knows where that guy might have sneaked off to. Then what can we do? Why don't we head over to the warriors' encampment? Gufei said. We'll let them get that first kill on him. We'll wait to get him the second, third, and so on. What do you think? This way might work. Too bad about giving up on that first kill, Eternal Dominion sighed. Everyone knew that the first time Southern Lone Blade would be at his highest level, and would be at his strongest. Logically speaking, that also meant the reward for that death would be the highest as well. Don't worry. We'll just kill him a few more times to make up for it, The way Gufei treated these MMO experts as nothing but flecks of dust would forever hurt the pride of his victims. After the two men came to their decision, they turned and headed back towards the warriors' encampment they had originally came from. While young Master Han was secretly firing off messages over to Gufei about all this, he was also asking Tanzanite Shade about the situation. His current setup was more or less in place, sending his men to guard the various city gates and the harbor. Even his guild members who were off grinding were called back for this emergency. The only thing that young Master Han found regrettable was how he had placed the emphasis on Gufei and Eternal Dominion. They had also found out that it was indeed Gufei and Eternal Dominion that had made the first move, so it was only fair for Blue Umber to place the blame on their heads. However, young Master Han had already reminded Gufei to change his clothes, so there was no need to worry about being recognized since there would be no way any of his members would be able to identify the two men now that the unique characteristics Tanzanite Shade had focused on no longer mattered. But it would be a waste to not tap into this huge resource before them and use it against Southern Lone Blade. Guild Leader Shade, are you acquainted with that man Southern Lone Blade? Young Master Han began to induce his schemes. I've never really met the man. All I've heard is he has always kept to himself, Tanzanite Shade said. Is Guild Leader Shade aware that he is actually a professional larcenist? Young Master Han said. Is that so? I've never heard it. Tanzanite Shade was calm when he heard this news, as if he was not surprised in the least. Indeed, the popularity of such endeavors in Parallel World was at an all-time high currently, so it was not exactly too shocking a news to hear someone being in the business. In fact, there were plenty of players who thought that larceny was actually a job that had good future prospects. In this world where there was no law enforcement, a person's view on morality was willfully twisted to fit their own needs. Only those righteous and upright individuals, as well as the victims themselves, held any resentment towards the act of larceny. In the case of the victims, their bitterness would truly only be directed towards the players who stole from them. If they were given a chance to obtain a top-grade equipment themselves, it was entirely likely they would not even hesitate to swap their roles, turning from prey into predator. Seeing Tanzanite Shade's reaction, young Master Han more or less inferred that this person was accustomed to such acts, which was more or less an attitude that was commonly found in MMOs. The more someone spent time in MMOs, they were more likely to become accustomed to such happenings. In Parallel World, the biggest difference came from those who had only just picked up gaming. Gallantly attempting to convince Tanzanite Shade about morality and justice that might fit for a shonen manga, but this was an adult's world. The most effective method would be to talk about benefits. And that was precisely the approach young Master Han went with, his words of sweet temptation targeting Tanzanite Shade. Guild Leader Shade, are you saying you have no interest in that magic staff they possess that can resurrect players? Of course I do. But Tanzanite Shade forcefully suppressed himself from shouting that out. Actually, Tanzanite Shade had already had designs on acquiring that staff when he gleaned the information the moment he reached the beach. He was not a priest, but it was players who were not that were more in love with the spell. In truth, priests were unable to cast this spell on themselves and were only able to experience the feeling of being sought after and regarded as the core because they possessed a skill that helped to fulfill their own vanity. The ones who truly benefited from the spell were actually the companions of the priest. But thinking further on it, Tanzanite Shade realized that it might not be easy to act upon his desire so easily. After all, Blue Umbrella was considered to be one of the dignified large guilds of Linchui City, doing a large amount of honest businesses up on the beach. Even though the general masses might not have much of a stance when it came to the act of larceny, there would be dire repercussions for his guild to actually performing such an act. Clearly, they would be seen as the bad guy in that scenario. The image of a guild was very important. Even though Tanzanite Shade really wanted to acquire that magic staff, he would definitely have to take a long-term approach towards it, rather than to seek after it in the open. Hence, this was exactly when young Master Han came in to plant the seed of an idea in his ear. Why not capitalize on the suspicion that arose as a result of the Spar incident and hunt them down? No one would cry foul if that piece of equipment was dropped as a result of their actions. Tanzanite Shade's eyes glimmered. But he believed that in this world, all it would take was for a kid to lament about his loss, and the rumor would fly free. When young Master Han saw that look of caution upon Tanzanite Shade's face, he smiled. If Guild Leader Shade still isn't comfortable with the idea, why don't you let us help you take care of it? We gotta kill these guys in the end, after all I ask is for your men to secretly aid us when we need it. Tanzanite Shade could feel his heart tighten, while young Master Han was laughing to himself. Saying he would help would be entirely superficial. They were strange bedfellows. There was no reason for Tanzanite Shade to believe that this mercenary group would readily hand over a piece of top-grade equipment with purely good intentions. Young Master Han did not think Tanzanite Shade would be so naive, either. The purpose of his proposition was actually to convey the idea to Tanzanite Shade that they were sure to kill them, informing him that if he had any design on getting that Staff of Resurrection, there would be no other chance in the future, since young Master Han and his compatriots would most likely abscond with it. If Tanzanite Shade were the suspicious sort, he might even believe that young Master Han and men were here specifically for the magic staff. Young Master Han had been the one speaking all this while, and was coincidentally a priest himself. Furthermore, Tanzanite Shade was sure to consider that they were not the only ones who had witnessed the resurrection spell go off, so there were sure to be more than just the two parties here competing to obtain that piece of equipment. There was no reason to drag this thing out any further. The sooner he could make his move, the better. The more time he spent hesitating over the matter of image or face, the more likely it would be that someone else would take it for themselves instead. Young Master Han had not said much, but the effect of his words were apparent, and many of the thoughts that had come to Tanzanite Shade were very much subtly induced by him. If people were suspicious of ideas that came from explicit persuasion, then there was no reason for the thoughts that they came up with themselves. Tanzanite Shade had already made his decision by this point as he barked out a rapacious laugh. Brother, your words make so much sense. I truly can't afford to let these guys go so easily. Well, I think that's about it for us. I have business to take care of, so I'll take my leave first. Tanzanite Shade sped through his words as he left in a hurry with his men. Young Master Han smiled warmly, as everything played out in the palm of his hands. The other four experts quietly watched the entire process in which young Master Han had implanted the ideas in Tanzanite Shade, playing the man like a fiddle. They had spent plenty of time around young Master Han, so they could more or less understand what he was thinking, but the four had a varying level of understanding. Sword Demon and young Master Han knew each other the best, so naturally the former could easily grasp his thought processes in their entirety. Meanwhile, Brother Assist was observant, and had a great understanding of how humans thought and acted, so he was able to tell what young Master Han was doing as well. As for War Without Wounds and Royal God Call, they originally had no idea what was going on. They had simply thought young Master Han was merely trying to convince this guild to target Southern Lone Blade, but were unable to read too deeply into the underlying implications of his last words to Tanzanite Shade. The two were still disappointed when they saw that those men had left in such a hurry. So are they giving us a hand or not? Their thoughts were still stuck on helping Blue Umbra obtain the piece of dropped equipment. The ensuing rebuff they got from young Master Han was unavoidable. The two were already used to this. Attempting to compete against young Master Han in this sort of thing was as ill-conceived and illogical as competing in swordsmanship with Gufei. No wonder that guy was in such a hurry to leave. Royal God Call breathed after he understood the matter. Tanzanite Shade had obviously disappeared quickly. Their group of 5 men were no longer friends, but competitors. He must find Southern Lone Blade and his squad before them, and at the same time, he would no longer reveal anything to the 5 men. Even young Master Han was unable to guess just what Tanzanite Shade might do. All he could do was plan out the next step that his own mercenary group would take. Chapter 410, Search. So what do we do now? War Without Wounds asked young Master Han what he had planned. Warriors' encampment, young Master Han answered. Oh, are we going to ride the gravy train and wait for them to serve themselves up? That's one way of going about it. Brother Assist nodded. But those guys might not be a match for Southern Lone Blade, Sword Demon said. After all, he had exchanged blows with 4 of the 7-man squad, so he had a rather good understanding as to the strength of Southern Lone Blade and his comrades. It's fine if you don't have faith in them, but you gotta at least believe that Miles would. Young Master Han said. Oh, that's right. Everyone nodded in agreement. Aren't we sending anyone over to the Priest Academy? War Without Wounds suddenly asked after they had traveled a distance away. Young Master Han immediately cast a look of scorn at the man, embarrassing War Without Wounds yet again. It was clear that his thoughts had been seen through by young Master Han. Unexpectedly, young Master Han actually sighed and said, Tanzanite Shadesmen would most likely prioritize that priest, so I'm certain he had already sent his men to surround the academy by now. We won't be able to snatch that kill away from them even if we leave anyone there, so it's best if we just leave it. War Without Wounds was still embarrassed, only this time because he had actually mistakenly thought that young Master Han would act honestly. There was nothing left to discuss then, so the 5 men headed towards the warriors' encampment together. Just as they were about to reach their destination, Royal God Call's eagle eyes immediately fixed on the 2 figures standing by the wall right beside the entrance. Hey, the 2 guys there look real familiar. The 2 men standing there were a mage and a fighter. Even though the mage was not dressed in a black robe, he nevertheless looked like their old friend from his build. These men all looked at one another before going forward, and those people slowly came into view. Of course, who else could they be, but Gufei and Eternal Dominion. The 2 had also spotted the 5 men and were equally astonished. The gears in young Master Han's head ground quick as he instantly realized what happened. He did not know whether to laugh or cry in the moment as he pointed at Gufei and swore, "You bastard!" Gufei was not slow on the uptake either, and quickly realized what happened. He too could only grimace at the situation they were now in. The others slowly made sense of what had happened at their own pace as well, exchanging glances with one another before finally succumbing to fits of laughter when they could no longer hold it in. Young Master Han was the only one who was unamused by all this, saying with a blackened face, "We're here to check on how you guys are doing your jobs. Is this what an employee should be doing? Wow, how shameless." Brother Assist and the others sighed deeply to themselves. Young Master Han sure was a head above the average man to be able to turn indignant in a flash like this. Eternal Dominion was momentarily affected by this atmosphere and felt his actions were truly unseemly. He felt it was improper for them to eschew challenging the difficult task despite it being what they were hired to do. But it was Gufei who shot back, "Where's Southern Lone Blade? Where is he now?" That was even more shameless. Brother Assist and the others were all overwhelmed once more. Gufei had actually ignored the tone of self-righteous admonishment that young Master Han had adopted, and simply cut right to the chase to change the topic. Gufei was quite possibly the only person that could assert such dominance so thoroughly in this scenario. Where was Southern Lone Blade? That was what everybody was concerned about, yet nobody present knew the answer. It was really unfortunate. 2. Both parties were clearly anxious to search for one another, yet they just did not have the chance to bump into one another in this big city. They were just not star-crossed lovers, lacking that sort of chance encounter that only kindred hearts beating as one could experience. "Are we gonna wait for Southern Lone Blade together, then?" War Without Wounds asked. Sword Demon shook his head, "I doubt that those guys have the skill to send Southern Lone Blade our way at this rate." "Hear that?" "If you heard, then what are you guys still standing here for? Go look for Southern Lone Blade." Young Master Han chastised Gufei. Young Master Han was their employer, their boss. It was only natural for him to press his employees to do their jobs. But the thing was, only Eternal Dominion could be considered to be the employee they hired, so he should really be shouting at Eternal Dominion. But since Gufei had decided to sandwich himself into this matter, it made sense for young Master Han to vent his frustration on someone who he was more familiar with instead. Eternal Dominion was already embarrassed that he was attempting to ride the gravy train by waiting for Southern Lone Blade to show up at the warriors' encampment. Now that young Master Han was scolding Gufei for his actions, he was of course within earshot and felt all the more humiliated, and he hurried to set off immediately. However, he had no idea where to go either, so all he could do was randomly pick a street and look around. Gufei sighed. Waiting for the enemy to serve himself up was great. Twice, thrice, they could kill Southern Lone Blade as many times as they wanted. But now, they had no choice but to let young Master Han and the rest take this gravy train. They had no choice in this. At the end of the day, they were the employers, and this was just how the typical capitalist was able to exploit labor through monopolizing the surplus value. Gufei could only helplessly follow Eternal Dominion and leave. But no sooner did they take their leave, a message from Fireball came streaking in, "Drunk bro, Did something happen? Sakura and his men, having exhausted almost all the liquor from the bar, were in no hurry to leave and had inquired after the matter from the other nearby bars. The news they gathered was of course no different from what young Master Han and the others had found out, and they were immediately able to find out the entirety of the situation after piecing the information together. Southern Lone Blade, huh? Sakura muttered. That guy seems to have only recently dropped out from the position of the 5 unyielding experts. Seems like that must have been at the hands of Drunk Bro and those guys. Everybody present nodded and agreed on this conclusion. As reprehensible and shameless as these men were, they were nevertheless MMO veterans to their very core, so their ability to evaluate and analyze the matter was not too far off that of the experts from Young Master's elite. This was especially true for Vast Lushness, who could be considered a specialist when it came to PvP conflicts. So that guy must have been sent to hunt Southern Lone Blade down, Vast Lushness said. Woe be to him. Everyone sighed and shook their head in unison. By now, everybody from Yeonju-on City had knew the No Smile incident during the closed beta was Gu Fei's handiwork. From there, it was clear just what sort of end his victims would meet once they were targeted by Gu Fei. I wonder if they need our help? Sakura asked. I'll ask. Fireball could be considered the one among them who knew Gu Fei the best, so he took the initiative to send a message to Gu Fei. Something? What something? Gu Fei asked Fireball. Young Master Han was correct. Gu Fei considered the act of slaying players to be a piece of cake. Whether his target was a noob that just left a designated safety zone at level 11 or someone who hailed from the ranks of the 5 unyielding experts, Gu Fei would never consider it to be anything worth noting. The thing between you and Southern Lone Blade, Fireball said. Oh. Only then did Gu Fei understand what he was referring to. It's nothing. I just slew him. How did you learn this? We're all in Linshui City right now. Do you need any help? Fireball replied. Gu Fei was just about to say no when he suddenly thought about this in detail. While he did not need their help in killing the man, but now he was faced with the dilemma of locating Southern Lone Blade. Having more manpower right now would really help move things along. Thus he quickly confirmed, "You're all here?" "Oh yeah, we're ready and awaiting Drunk Bro's orders." Fireball replied enthusiastically. Great. Do you guys know what Southern Lone Blade looks like? Gu Fei asked. Gu Fei hurriedly checked with all his comrades before answering Gu Fei. Nope. In that case, let's first meet up before we discuss this matter. The two parties picked a coordinate and met inside the city. Eternal Dominion? Everyone had found out that Gu Fei was working with a fighter from the matter by the bar, but Vast Lushness never expected that the player would actually be Eternal Dominion. She was extremely shocked when she saw them together. Hello, how do you do? When Eternal Dominion saw that this person knew his name, he quickly greeted her, before quietly whispering to Gu Fei, "Who's this?" "A woman." Saying Gu Fei's answer was vague would be an understatement. "Drunk Bro, tell us, how are we gonna take care of Southern Lone Blade?" Sakura was standing right in front of Vast Lushness. He would have looked truly dashing and righteous if his face were covered. Hey! Eternal Dominion was still whispering to Gu Fei as he asked, "Why are there so many people lending us a hand? How are we gonna split the reward so many ways? Why don't you speak up louder if you really want to split your rewards with the others?" Gu Fei replied in equally hushed tones. Eternal Dominion immediately shut up. "What are you two mumbling about over there?" Vast Lushness asked. "Right now, the problem we are facing is locating Southern Lone Blade." Gu Fei used the same tactic of ignoring that question and diving straight into the issue at hand. If even young Master Han was helpless to do anything about it, Vast Lushness was of course easily crushed in her attempt to find out more. "Oh, so Drunk Bro has no idea where he went?" Someone asked. "What nonsense you're spouting. If Drunk Bro knew where that guy was hiding, why would he even still be alive?" Fireball handily slapped that smartass. "Yeah, we've still got no idea." Gu Fei laughed sheepishly. "That is why we need everybody's help to locate him." "Not everybody has to go out and search, just remember to inform me the moment you spot him. There's no need for you to be courteous with us, Drunk Bro. Just look for us whenever you need help to take him down." Everyone offered a hand grandly. "Oh, there's no need for that." "Really?" Gu Fei hurriedly interjected. "But the problem is that we won't recognize him at all." Sakurazaka said. He's not alone. He's together with 6 other men of his. Aside from the warrior Southern Lone Blade, there's a mage, a thief, an archer, a knight, and 2 priests. Gufei gave a general description of the job class composition of his 7-man squad. Finding just one man would be difficult, but it should be easier to locate the group as a whole, right? Everybody nodded. Then we will have to depend on your hard work, everyone. Does anyone have any further question? Gufei asked. I do. A man had raised his hand. Everybody turned to look at him as he gazed at Gufei expectantly. Drunk bro, is there any babes among the 7? Oh. Everybody exhaled, as they looked forward to Gufei's answer. But this expectant look they showed only made Gufei feel like he had let everyone down, since the answer would leave them all disappointed. Nope. They are all men. Phew. He did not expect everyone to instead reveal a look of relief, as they all heaved a sigh. That's good. That means we don't have to hold anything back when we deal with them. Gufei wiped away his imaginary cold sweat. Alright. Let's all split up and go look. Don't mess around and attack when you spot the man. Remember to send a message to inform everybody first. Sakurazaka gave a single command as the group of men dispersed in every direction, starting their search for Southern Lone Blade throughout Linshui City. The other guys from your mercenary group have already arrived. Have you seen them? Vastlushness asked Gufei. Yep, Gufei said. When she saw no traces of the 5 men anywhere near, she boldly ventured a guess. Are they in the warriors' encampment? You're clever. Gufei complimented her. I'm just familiar with how such hunts go, Vastlushness explained plainly. Gufei smiled and patted Eternal Dominion. Let's go search, as well. Do you need my help? Vastlushness asked. Nope, Gufei chuckled. The target is just Southern Lone Blade alone, so my mana is more than enough. Vastlushness nodded, and randomly chose the direction to look for traces of Southern Lone Blade squad. At the same time, the ferry that went to the level 40 grinding map slowly drifted into Linshui City's harbor. A huge group of players disembarked and hurried over to the city.